Look, everybody is staring at the evening news right now,
Hmm.
watching the missiles fly and just
Completely panic selling their portfolios.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a push notification about some military escalation, you check your retirement account, you see a sea of red, and suddenly you think the sky is falling on the global economy.
Right, which is exactly why we are here today.
Yeah. Welcome to the deep dive. For you viewers tuning in today, we are ripping the Band-Aid off this dual shock we are seeing. You've got massive military escalation colliding right into a severe financial contraction happening at the exact same time.
At the exact same time. And it's a lot to process.
It is. So we are cutting through the noise.
Hmm.
We want to look at what is actually happening to the world map, and more importantly, what's happening to your money.
Right. And to do that properly, we really have to step back. We need to look at the cold, hard mechanics of this situation.
No political bias.
No taking sides, none of that. Our mandate today is strict, objective analysis of the sources we've gathered. We have to weigh the negative panics, the raw fear driving these market crashes, and those terrifying geopolitical headlines against the positive alternative.
Because there are positive alternatives.
Exactly. We need to look at historical market resilience and the massive structural economic shifts happening beneath the surface. Shifts that, frankly, most people are completely ignoring right now.
Yeah, let's get right into those structural shifts because the market is, it's completely mispricing the risk right now.
100%.
You look at the drop this week, and the gut reaction is to point at the Middle East, point at the threat of global war, and say, boom, that is the sole reason my money is evaporating.
But if you actually run the numbers...
Right, if you run the numbers, there is this massive reality check in our sources called the 30-70 illusion.
The 30-70 illusion. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It really is. War risk, all that geopolitical tension and panic you see on the screen actually only accounts for 30% of the current market volatility.
30%.
Just 30%.
It feels like it should be 100% right because it absolutely dominates the news cycle. But it isn't.
So what's the rest?
Well, the remaining 70% of this market volatility is driven by a completely different factor. It is the fundamental restructuring of the global semiconductor market combined with these broader macroeconomic shifts.
That is your 70% reality.
Exactly. We are talking about the massive rewiring of tech supply chains.
Right.
Unprecedented capital expenditures in artificial intelligence infrastructure, and these giant near-shoring efforts that are completely bottlenecking chip production globally.
Right. It is about silicon, not artillery. Look, if you are a viewer sitting there and you are trying to time your investments based on troop movements in the desert, you are getting played by the algorithms. The first and honestly most important rule of this current economy is that the true long-term trajectory of your portfolio is tied up in microchips.
The headlines want you sweating the 30%. They really do. But the institutional money, they are maneuvering around that 70% tech restructuring.
And the reason institutional money isn't just blindly panicking over that 30% war risk is because the fundamental math of warfare itself has changed.
It has completely changed.
The market knows that the era of the quick, clean, superpower victory is essentially over.
If you look at the historical data, it tells a very different story than what we naturally assume about military dominance.
The statistics in this document are a massive wake-up call. I mean, we always assume the bigger guy with the bigger guns just walks in and cleans house.
Right. And historically, that actually used to be true. Between the years 1800 and 1998, superpowers had a rock-solid 71% win rate in their conflicts.
71%, they dominated.
They absolutely dominated. But the data shows a tectonic shift post-1945. From 1945 onward, that superpower win rate dropped to 61%.
Wow.
Meanwhile, weaker nations saw their win rate climb to 39%.
But you have to dig into the context of those numbers, right? Specifically the home ground advantage, because that is where the real story is for our viewers today.
Oh, absolutely. When weaker nations are defending their own territory, they win 63% of the time.
63%.
Yes. In those specific defensive scenarios, the superpower win rate completely collapses to an abysmal 37%.
A 37% win rate for the most advanced, heavily funded militaries on the planet.
It is staggering.
That is terrible odds. Look, you wouldn't take those odds on a football game, let alone a global conflict involving trillions of dollars. Why is Goliath losing his edge so badly here?
It really comes down to the fundamental vulnerabilities of modern democracies when they are fighting asymmetric wars.
Okay, break that down.
Democracies face relentless election cycles and intense public opinion pressures. The public has an incredibly short tolerance for casualties, for draft expansions, and for prolonged multi-trillion-dollar spending.
Right, the taxpayers get tired.
Exactly. And weaker nations understand this dynamic perfectly. They know they cannot win a pitched conventional battle against a superpower, so they don't even try to.
They use attrition tactics.
Yes.
It is like a boxing match, where the underdog just keeps hugging the champ in the ring. They don't need a knockout blow. They just need to drag the fight out to the later rounds until the champ gets exhausted, the taxpayers get sick of the bill, and the crowd turns on him.
They turn the war into a political waiting game.
Which brings us perfectly to the current flashpoint with Iran. Because right now, there is this massive tactical illusion floating around on the news networks, the myth of the decisive airstrike.
It is an incredibly pervasive myth. People assume that if you possess superior air power, you can simply bomb a complex geopolitical problem into submission.
Just fly over and fix it.
Right. But the historical reality from our sources is that no regime has ever been completely toppled by airstrikes alone. It does not happen.
Not once.
Take Libya as a prime example. You had a massive, coordinated, highly sophisticated aerial campaign there. But air power only degrades an enemy. It cannot hold territory or force a complete regime change.
You need boots on the ground for that.
Ultimately, yes. Ground troops, which in Libya's case were the rebel forces, were required to actually end the conflict.
And when you look at the geographic reality of Iran right now, a ground invasion sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare.
Oh, it is daunting.
The stats are literally insane. We are not talking about a small, isolated nation. We are talking about a population of 89 million people.
89 million.
We are talking about an economy with a $1.5 trillion gross domestic product, and the land mass is 18 times the size of South Korea. 18 times.
It is massive.
You don't just roll an armored division across a country that size over a long weekend.
Especially when you factor in the topography. Iran is highly mountainous, which naturally fractures any invading force and creates endless defensive choke points.
Right. It's a geographic fortress.
And their critical military and nuclear assets aren't just sitting out in the open on the sand. They are buried deep in those mountains, over 100 meters underground.
Over 100 meters deep.
Yes. That kind of depth severely limits the effectiveness of even the most advanced bunker-busting munitions in a superpower's arsenal.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate. Let's say a superpower somehow commits to a ground invasion anyway to finish the job. The risk isn't just contained to Iran's borders, is it?
Not at all. It is magnified by this massive web of proxy retaliation threatening the rear.
You have Hezbollah, you have the Houthi rebels, you have heavily armed Syrian militias.
Exactly.
It is literally like kicking a massive hornet's nest while you are actively trying to wrestle a bear. You are getting stung from every conceivable direction.
That is a very accurate analogy. It completely exposes why the old desert warfare playbook from the 90s just isn't working anymore.
Which naturally leads to the severe diplomatic fallout we are currently seeing.
Yes, the diplomatic isolation is real.
The international community is looking at these exact same realities. They see the 37% superpower win rate. They see the entrenched geography, the buried assets, and the proxy threats.
And because they see the cold, hard math, they are backing away. This is creating a level of diplomatic isolation that severely complicates any military effort.
It is a ghost town out there compared to the Gulf War. I mean, back then, you had this massive unified coalition of nations jumping in together. Today, the United States and Israel are operating largely alone.
Very alone.
You look at the European response right now, detailed in the sources, and it is a stark fracturing of traditional alliances.
It is very revealing. The United Kingdom has severely restricted their base usage, limiting it to defense only.
Right. And Spain.
Spain issued an outright refusal to participate in any capacity.
And France. The French president explicitly condemned the airstrikes, calling them a direct violation of international law.
Again, we are reporting this objectively based on the texts. We aren't taking sides here.
Absolutely. But the operational reality is that when you are that diplomatically isolated, your logistical supply chains and your strategic options shrink dramatically.
They absolutely shrink, and it forces a superpower into a corner where they might start looking for aggressive shortcuts to end the conflict quickly.
Shortcuts like what?
Well, one of the most common shortcuts discussed is targeting leadership, specifically eliminating the supreme leader.
Ah, the paradox of assassination.
Exactly. It introduces a massive negative consequence known as the martyrdom dilemma.
You think you are cutting the head off the snake to solve the problem, but you are actually handing the regime the ultimate lifeline.
Precisely. If you eliminate the supreme leader, you run the immense risk of transforming him into a martyr.
Which changes everything internally for them.
It does. You instantly unite a fractured 89 million person populace against a common foreign enemy.
So any internal revolutionary movements, any domestic momentum that might have actually pushed for an organic regime change from the inside.
It gets completely crushed under a wave of nationalistic fervor. An action that looks decisive and aggressive on paper would completely backfire, making the regime far stronger internally.
You essentially do their propaganda work for them.
You really do.
Okay, so we have mapped out the reality of the board. The military options are stalled, the geography is a fortress, the airstrikes are mostly theater, and the diplomatic alliances are heavily fractured.
It is a massive geopolitical mess.
It is. So let's pivot back to you, the viewer, and talk about the conservative playbook. Given all this chaos on the screen, what is the actual alternative to panicking and liquidating your entire portfolio? How do we use this data practically?
This is where we have to rely on positive historical truths regarding the market's natural resilience.
Okay, give us the good news.
Even in the middle of severe, terrifying crash events driven by global conflict, markets historically tend to naturally recover about 50% of the initial drop.
50%.
Yes. The absolute worst thing you can do as an investor during the most volatile phase is panic sell.
Because if you sell at the bottom, all you are doing is locking in your losses before that natural 50% rebound even has a chance to kick in.
Exactly.
You have to have ice in your veins and separate your money from your emotions. But you also have to be careful, right? Because that recovery phase isn't just a smooth, easy ride back to the top. There are hidden dangers.
There are definitely hidden dangers. You will see bizarre financial movements mixed right into the current market rebound. You absolutely cannot blindly trust one-sided war news or premature declarations of victory.
Right. We saw a prime example of this during the early days of the Ukraine war.
We did. There were highly emotional headlines obscuring the objective battle conditions.
People made massive investment decisions based on a fleeting feeling of victory or defeat.
And that feeling completely failed to match the actual grinding reality on the ground.
People were buying the headline, not the reality. They saw a news story about a tactical win and threw money at the market, completely ignoring the broader logistical nightmare.
Which is always a mistake.
Always. So, if we synthesize all of this into a real strategy for the viewer, true financial resilience requires you to aggressively detach from the daily, minute-by-minute news cycle.
You have to step back.
You have to maintain a conservative investment stance, and most importantly, you have to anchor your strategy to those undeniable macroeconomic shifts we opened with. You have to navigate based on that 70% reality.
You observe the objective conditions, not the emotional narratives. The fundamental restructuring of the global semiconductor market, the nearshoring of supply chains, the AI infrastructure build-out.
Those are the heavy hitters.
Those factors dictate the true long-term trajectory of your portfolio far more than any single battle or diplomatic spat.
You focus on the silicon, not the missiles. Let's bring it all home. We have covered the entire board today. We broke down the dual shock of military escalation and market contraction.
We debunked the 30-70 illusion, showing that the real driver of market volatility is tech and macro trends, not just war risk.
Right. We looked at the hard numbers, showing that the era of quick superpower victories is essentially dead, dropping to a 37% win rate against homegrown defenders.
We examined the geographic fortress of Iran, the absolute myth of decisive airstrikes, the real risk of proxy wars, and how completely isolated the current efforts are diplomatically.
The overarching takeaway for the viewer today is that the global markets are reacting to much deeper technological and structural shifts than the evening news wants to admit.
The headlines demand that you focus your energy on the 30%. But the historical data and the institutional money tell you to focus on the 70%.
And before we wrap, we always want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to take with you after the screen goes dark.
Here is the question. If traditional military might is no longer guaranteeing a quick victory, and the real driver of global wealth is the fundamental restructuring of the semiconductor market, are we entering an era where a nation's true defense system is entirely economic and technological?
That is a massive shift.
It is. What does the word superpower even mean in a world where silicon chips dictate the future more than missiles?
That is the exact question you need to be asking yourself when you look at your investments and the world map today. Viewers, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay conservative in your strategies, don't let the headlines force you into a panic, and always look beyond the battlefield. We will catch you on the next one.